The sun dipped low over the endless plains, casting a golden hue across the sprawling ranch where Elias Hawthorne had spent all of his 100 years. His weathered hands gripped the porch railing, his eyes tracing the horizon as they had every evening since he was a boy. The ranch was his world, acres of rolling fields, grazing cattle, and a creaky old house filled with memories of a life lived alone. Elias was a man of routine, rising with the dawn to tend his herd, mending fences under the blistering sun, and retiring to his solitary supper by lamplight. The townsfolk called him the Lonely Rancher, a title whispered with pity, for at 100, Elias had never known the warmth of a lover's touch. His heart, though kind, had been guarded by shyness and the weight of years spent in solitude. The world beyond his ranch had changed, cars replaced horses, and cities sprouted where prairies once stood, but Elias remained untouched by time's march. That evening, as he sipped his coffee, a speck appeared on the road, a figure walking toward his gate. It was a woman, young and out of place, her city clothes dusted with the dirt of a long journey. Her name was Clara, and she carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, her face flushed with exhaustion. She stopped at the gate, her eyes meeting his, and asked for shelter for the night. Elias, startled by her boldness, hesitated but saw the desperation in her gaze. He nodded, his voice gruff but kind, and invited her to stay. As they walked to the house, Clara's story began to unfold. She was running from a life in the city that had left her hollow, seeking something real, something she couldn't name. Elias listened, his heart stirring with a feeling he hadn't known in decades, as the stars began to speckle the sky above the ranch. Clara sat at Elias' worn kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea he'd brewed from herbs grown in his garden. The house smelled of cedar and thyme, its walls lined with photographs of a younger Elias standing proud beside horses and hay bales. She studied him as he moved about, his steps slow but deliberate, his face etched with lines that told stories he'd never shared. Clara spoke of the city, its noise, its rush, the way it swallowed dreams whole. She'd been a writer, chasing deadlines and fleeting fame, but the pressure had broken her spirit. That morning she'd left everything behind, boarding a bus with no destination, walking miles when it dropped her off at a dusty crossroads. Elias listened, his silence not cold but comforting like the quiet of the plains. He shared little of himself, only that the ranch had been his family for generations, and he'd stayed because it was all he knew. Yet as Clara spoke of her loneliness, Elias felt a pang of recognition. He'd never spoken of his own solitude, the nights spent wondering if life had passed him by. Clara's presence filled the house with a strange energy, her laughter at his dry humor echoing in rooms long silent. She asked about his life, her questions gentle but persistent, and Elias found himself revealing fragments of his past. A mother who taught him to read, a father who showed him the stars, a youth spent dreaming of love but too shy to pursue it. By the time the clock struck midnight, Clara's eyes were heavy, but she lingered, reluctant to end the conversation. Elias offered her the guest room, its quilt hand-stitched by his grandmother, and as she thanked him, her hand brushed his. The touch, fleeting as it was, sent a warmth through Elias that he couldn't explain, a spark that lingered as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what this stranger's arrival meant. Morning broke with the crow of a rooster, and Elias was up before dawn, his routine unbroken despite the guests sleeping upstairs. He fed the chickens, checked the cattle, and mended a fence post, but his thoughts kept drifting to Clara. She emerged as the sun climbed higher, her city boots scuffing the dirt as she wandered the ranch, marveling at its simplicity. Elias watched her from afar, noting how she paused to touch the wildflowers, her face alight with wonder. Over breakfast, she asked to help with chores, insisting she wanted to earn her keep. Elias, unused to company, hesitated but handed her a bucket for collecting eggs. They worked side by side, Clara's questions filling the air. How did he manage alone? Why had he never left? What kept him here? Elias answered sparingly, but her curiosity chipped away at his walls. He spoke of the land's rhythms, the way the seasons taught patience, and how the ranch was his anchor in a world that moved too fast. Clara shared more of her story: failed relationships, a career that felt like a cage, a longing for a life with meaning. As they walked the fields, she tripped on a root and Elias caught her arm, steadying her. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to pause, the weight of their ages, hers young, his ancient, fatting in the shared silence. By afternoon, Clara was laughing as she tried to herd a stubborn calf, her city polish giving way to a raw, joyful energy. Elias found himself smiling, a rare occurrence that felt foreign yet right. As they sat on the porch at dusk, Clara admitted she had nowhere to go, no plan beyond escaping her past. She asked to stay another night, her voice soft but earnest, and Elias, against his better judgment, agreed. The ranch, once his solitary refuge, now hummed with the possibility of something new, and Elias felt a stirring he hadn't dared to name in a century. Days turned into a week, and Clara became a fixture on the ranch, her presence as natural as the wind rustling the grass. She took to the work with a determination that surprised Elias, her hands blistered but eager as she learned to mend fences and milk cows. They fell into a rhythm, sharing meals and stories, their differences, city and country, youth and age, blurring with each passing day. Elias taught Clara to ride a horse, his hands steadying her as she gripped the reins, her laughter filling the air when she nearly fell. In return, Clara read to him from books she'd carried in her backpack, tales of far-off places that stirred Elias' imagination. He never traveled beyond the county line, but her words painted worlds he'd never seen. One evening, as they sat by a fire under the stars, Clara asked why he'd never married, her tone gentle but direct. Elias hesitated, the question unearthing a wound he'd buried long ago. He spoke of a girl from his youth, a fleeting love lost to time and his own timidity, and how he'd chosen the ranch over chasing dreams. Clara listened, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and shared her own regrets, loves lost to ambition, connections sacrificed for a career that left her empty. The vulnerability between them grew, a bridge spanning the decades that separated their lives. Clara reached for his hand, her touch deliberate this time, and Elias didn't pull away. The night stretched on, their conversation a tapestry of shared pain and quiet hopes, and when Clara asked to stay longer, not just for a night but indefinitely, Elias felt his heart race, a sensation he thought he'd forgotten. He nodded, unable to speak, as the fire crackled and the stars bore witness to a bond neither had expected. The ranch seemed to bloom with Clara's presence, as if her energy awakened something dormant in the land itself. Wildflowers she'd planted began to sprout, and the old house felt less like a museum and more like a home. Elias, too, felt a change, his steps lighter, his smiles more frequent. Clara took to writing again, her notebook filled with stories inspired by the ranch, by Elias' quiet strength, by the life she was discovering. She read her drafts to him at night, her voice weaving tales of love and resilience, and Elias, who never thought himself worthy of such stories, felt a pride he couldn't articulate. Yet doubts lingered. He was a century old, his body frail despite his spirit's vigor, and Clara was vibrant, her life still unfolding. He wondered what she saw in him, a man who'd lived so long yet loved so little. One afternoon, as they repaired a barn door, Clara sensed his unease and confronted it. She spoke of how the city had taught her to chase fleeting things, fame, wealth, youth, but the ranch and Elias showed her something enduring. She admired his constancy, his heart untainted by the world's cynicism. Elias, moved by her words, admitted his fear, that he was too old, too set in his ways to offer her anything but a quiet life. Clara laughed softly, saying quiet was what she'd been searching for all along. That evening, as they sat on the porch, she leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and Elias felt a warmth that rivaled the sun. She asked to stay not as a guest, but as a partner in this life, and though Elias' heart trembled at the thought, he agreed, knowing this was the closest he'd ever come to love. The ranch, once his solitude, now held two souls finding solace in each other. Months passed, and the rhythm of the ranch became their shared heartbeat. Clara's writing flourished, her stories gaining attention from publishers who marveled at the authenticity of her voice. She credited Elias, the ranch, and the life they were building. Elias, in turn, found purpose in teaching Clara the ways of the land, his knowledge a legacy he'd never thought to pass on. The townsfolk, once pitying, now spoke of the ranch with curiosity, drawn by rumors of the city girl who'd stayed. Visitors came, some seeking Clara's stories, others intrigued by the unlikely pair. Elias, once a recluse, found himself welcoming strangers, his gruff demeanor softened by Clara's warmth. Yet not all was idyllic. Clara received letters from the city, offers of fame, invitations to return, and Elias saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. One night, as a storm rolled across the plains, she confessed her fear of losing herself again, of being pulled back to a life she'd fled. Elias, his voice steady despite his own fears, told her she was free to choose, that the ranch was her home only as long as she wanted it to be. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she admitted she'd fallen in love, not just with the ranch but with him. The words struck Elias like lightning, unraveling a century of loneliness. He took her hand, his own trembling, and spoke of the love he'd buried, now alive because of her. The storm raged outside, but within the house, a quiet understanding settled. Clara chose to stay, not out of obligation, but because the ranch and Elias had become her heart's home. They sat together, hands clasped as the rain battered the windows, sealing a bond forged in time and trust. The seasons turned, and the ranch became a testament to their shared life. Clara's stories were published, her words reaching readers across the country, each one carrying the spirit of the land and the man who'd shaped it. Elias, though still frail, seemed to defy time, his spirit buoyed by Clara's presence. They worked as a team, her energy complementing his wisdom, and the ranch thrived in ways it hadn't in decades. They built a small library in the barn, filling it with books and inviting the townsfolk to share in their world. Clara taught children to write, while Elias shared stories of the land's history, their partnership a bridge between past and present. Yet, Elias knew his time was finite, his body reminding him of the century it had carried. One evening, as they sat under the stars, he spoke of his mortality, his voice calm but heavy. Clara listened, her heart aching, and promised to carry on the ranch to keep his legacy alive. She spoke of love not as a moment but as a life built together, and Elias felt a peace he'd never known. They spent their days cherishing each moment, from quiet mornings tending the herd to nights filled with laughter and stories. Clara's presence had transformed the ranch and Elias into something timeless, a love that defied age, a home that welcomed all. As winter approached, Elias'